All right, you guys. Just to wrap up on our kind of shorter, we just had like 20 minutes to jump into a project today. So I jumped into the screw conveyor. We still have an ignorant part here that won't quite comply. Some people have got it to work, others it's not working. So it's the discharge chute of the 12 gauge. And so I'm just making this video to get pretty much the last of our 12 gauge parts here cooperating. So what I've done is one more attempt at this. This might be my third try at trying to get this part to work and uh, and cut correctly a little bit. So what I've done, I've already done it here, so I'm just going to move my end of folded above my last commands here. But and if you have, we talked about this a little bit today, is once I'm refining my model, if I have things that are suppressed or if I have things that should be working that aren't working, um, or unexpectedly they're grayed out or whatever it is, at some point I clean all that up and I get rid of suppressed stuff, um, and I get rid of things that might be below my end of folded if they're unnecessary anymore. So I just do, I try to keep this file as clean as I can and as understandable as I can, and I try to troubleshoot any problems that it has here because they just affect things downstream, the assembly and the parts created from it. So this is what I have open is kind of what I call that part assembly where we've exported our components from to make our individual assembly and individual parts. And so this is what I have open, and um, this is where I go in to make like major changes in how these parts work together, and then let the effects downstream just happen. Okay, so, and then I think I've reiterated in class a few times. I'll keep reiterating it. It's just trying to open my mind to this concept of what's downstream from this part and what's upstream. Like this does have an upstream part, which is the solid that we've all been working on, and that we have as the base component underlying even this part. And so this is as far upstream as my creation process is at this point. This solid is the up, the component that's the most upstream, and then downstream from that we've created this, and then downstream from here we've created an assembly and parts. And so there's this relationship that exists, and depending on where you choose to do your changes only affects really at that point and downstream from it, right? So if I go to the individual parts and try to create some of this and try to repair some of the way the relationships and how these parts are fitting together, then they don't communicate upstream from there, and they just live from there down, right? So I try to be upstream as much as I can. It's the reason why I front load a project like this pretty heavily with a solid and then with these part assemblies. It's just because I'm spending a lot of my time in this front loading, so that the downstreams can happen relatively quickly with just updates to the files. And so, and this works and doesn't work at times. So, and then I have to troubleshoot and go upstream to the part. Well, this is going to be my most upstream part for the actual 12 gauge parts, and it's where I've been working with to try to get this discharge chute to behave properly and become a sheet metal flat pattern. So the technique I showed today, and I'm recapturing this video just because I was refining it a little bit, but the only thing I'm doing is, you know, it's pretty common for me to do different methods in here to try to get the results I'm looking for. And so sometimes I do suppress things to try another method of getting a result that I'm trying to get. And then if that result is successful, then those suppressed steps of my model, I would likely delete out of here eventually because I just don't, they're not, they didn't work for me. I understand suppressing them while I'm troubleshooting a little bit, so I don't just lose them. And maybe my next attempt is even worse, and I just delete it. So there are reasons why I'm strategically, sometimes suppressing things to try a different route, and then finding what that route is that's the best for me, and then deleting that didn't work. And so it's pretty normal part of the design process for sure. So I don't love to delete things until I absolutely know, yes, those things are just obsolete anymore. I've developed a different way. And so that's what I'm doing here. I don't have any suppressed stuff, but you guys might. So just start to pay attention to that. And I do have some things below the end of folded, but it's just the steps I've used to create this video essentially. So what I'm going to show you is kind of my third method in troubleshooting why my flat pattern won't work out on this discharge chute, why it's kind of been ignorant. And it's in our class, it's been different for everyone. Some people have had no problems, other people's they have had problems. And so I've kind of just made myself troubleshoot this several ways to see how I can resolve these issues. And that's pretty common. But you have to know the ways to troubleshoot it, right? So that takes a little bit of learning and experimentation. So I'm going through the kind of methods that I that are kicking around in my head of trying trying a different way to get the same result I'm looking for here. So, I'm keeping the way, originally we had this solid created and it was one solid and bending kind of funny differently on each side. And so then I came back to it and I revisited it and I individualized those thicknesses on that solid. And then I added the bends later. And that's kind of and then I was happy with this solid. It has I was able to join all those once I've done my bends into one solid. So originally they may have been separate solids and then I've joined them. And yeah. e- Even if I would have done them as separate steps, like I think in this one I may have done them, I don't know, anyway, separate steps, but maybe the same solid, and then it would have created. I think that's why mine aren't grayed out here on my thicken, is because really I think I've done them as separate steps, kind of with the same solid, but I did create that open quarter joint relationship in before the bend was done that I was happier with, rather than yeah, the first way we did this, I didn't like at all. I just didn't like that it wasn't really creating a bend, but it was joining those solids into this nice, all the corners really square, and I couldn't see the metal thickness separation at all. And so even just keeping them the same solid and thickening the faces somewhat individually was created an outside corner joint for the sheet metal that then I could apply a bend to. And so that's probably what I've done here is I kept them as the same. I probably did this one first, and I kept this one the same solid, but I didn't, but it didn't join the way it did the other way, I think. I could be wrong on this. Anyway, for sure in class, we did them as separate solids and then joined them through a bend, and then they gray out here. Well, those aren't suppressed features per se. They're just ones that have kind of been overridden by the program itself as I join those solids with a bend. It's like that program already knows that, well, this thicken command is kind of like you can't get to it again because I've kind of bent it into the other solid. And so to have them grayed out is okay generally, but to have them overridden, or should say suppressed, crossed out, that's, when you suppress them, it almost puts a strike through, a gray and strike through. Yeah, that's definitely different than just having them grayed and absorbed. But mine might look a little different than yours. I still wouldn't worry about that if that's how your bends have affected your thickenings here. And so what I'm going to do is show you this last method that has been mostly successful for everybody, I think. And it is to do a unfold refold. So you can kind of in this technique, I would tend I don't use this a ton, but I have used it, a fair amount. Maybe sometimes it's my last resort in some cases, but sometimes it is needed, this method of unfolding and refolding. So these are foldable parts with bends. Obviously, it would have to have some bend to it to unfold. Rolls would be considered bends as well. So I could actually unroll this feature and lay it flat. And you can do this as almost an exploration of the flat pattern. Um, so sometimes I might do this kind of step as I'm just looking through my part and evaluating things, and it might be something that I do as an exploration, and then I maybe delete it out after I've done what I want to do, unless I need it. In this case, it's going to be something we keep, but I'm going to unfold this part here. So I'm going to unfold. It wants me to, so this dialog box opens up, which would be new to us, I think, but it just says stationary reference. So I have to pick something that's not going to move while other things move. And so you just need to, and sometimes this matters, which, to pick your stationary reference, I guess, isn't intuitive always. And so you might have to try this a few different ways if your part doesn't unfold the way you're wanting it to. But the stationary reference is ideally going to stay in position. And so on this particular case, I want to unfold this and almost look at like what the flat pattern would look like if I could unfold this right here. And so I'm going to pick my stationary reference as this particular side. I'm just going to choose that face. It is saying, this solid, it recognizes that face lives on this solid. So you get that yellow, like this is the solid that's going to be affected by this process. And I could choose to pick individual bends or I can pick all bends. And so sometimes when I'm playing with parts like this, it's not the whole thing I need to unfold, but there's sections of it that I might need to unfold. And so in this case, I am going to unfold it all. So I'm going to choose all bends, and I get this thing like showing me what it's going to look like when it unfolds. Obviously, if I'm not getting this like this preview, then I probably have a problem with my selection, or I have some problem, something that can't unfold. And so I don't exactly know how that blows up on you unless I go through it myself a little bit. But in this, I'm getting, the witnesses that, hey, this looks like it's going to unfold the way a normal flat pattern would unfold, like this as my stationary reference. And I've added all bends, and then I really haven't done I haven't done any other beyond default selection here, and I'm just going to say okay on this, and then it unfolds that part for me. So here's the unfolded, what that's going to look like. Now I'm going to do my sketch that is the cut. And so that would be another thing I would want to be have below my end of folded at this point, or just go and select. If you have the cut somewhere above the end of folded still, you're going to need to probably suppress that cut and then potentially delete it later here if this works. And so, because I'm going to start a new sketch here. Um, yeah. So I'm just electing to do a new sketch here on like this same face here. So I'm going to say new sketch on this face. Yeah, it's easiest to get through without turning off surfaces. So I'm going to say this face is where I'm going to sketch on. What I want to do is that cut when it's in its flat position here for this. And so I'm going to say I'm going to project some geometry here. The round semicircle part of the housing that is going to cut through that piece. I'm going to project that. There it is. And then I'm just going to F7 slice graphics and get in here and connect the top of those into a closed polygon here. So I'm just going to use a line and select my endpoints of this projected geometry. And yeah, so that's my closed polygon, should be anyway. Um, the only reason why I didn't select just this particular line or this face is because it really is broken up into a bunch of little segments through that bend. That you could also just click through and project them, but I've just decided to override them with my own line that's continuous. So I'm going to say finish that sketch. I'm going to perform this cut right now while it's like this. I'm going to say cut that. So this will cut the thickness by default, right? Thickness is being cut through a sheet metal part, and that's what it's going to look like. Kind of cuts through that bend when it's in its flat position. I'm going to say okay. That's the solid. It's selected automatically. If you don't have the right solid selected, make sure you select it's that one. And then I'm going to say okay. So then that cut has been performed at this stage. And now I'm just going to do a refold of this to put it back into its correct orientation. I mean, this would affect the way I would export this part. And so I'm just going to say refold that. Generally, I try to do this, the kind of the reverse of what I did to unfold. And so sometimes I try to remember, you could go into this unfold and figure out which was your stationary reference and all that jazz and which bends you unfolded. So you might have to revisit this in some situations. Right now, I can remember, like if I'm going to refold this right here on my modified command table or just below unfold, it just wants to know what is your stationary reference to refold. So I'm going to say, well, this is where I remember kind of my order generally. That's my stationary reference, and then I want to add back all the bends to it, and then it shows that it's going to go back into where we had unfolded it from. Refold it. I kept everything else default, and I say okay. It seems to be happy to refold that way. And so now the question is whether the assembly that we already have for this and the parts will accept this change. And what we found in class was some people didn't have any issues like this, which is it's kind of what I was expecting because I didn't have any problems on my end that once I made these changes here, it's going to impact the assembly and the parts. And so I wasn't anticipating having a problem, but then we did have a few of us that just wouldn't accept that as an update to that next assembly and parts. And so we'll walk through what we did to solve that. But generally, like if it works like it should, and that's just the buggy nature of it seems like it should work. If it worked for me, it should work for you, but that's not always the case. So if it works for you, it would be like this for me. I'm actually gonna undo. I'm gonna go back to what I already have done because I've just done the same steps here, and so I'm essentially going to. I'm just gonna close this without saving just for a minute, and I'm gonna open it up again and it'll be like at this point. So you would keep yours here, but I'm just going to say save changes. No on mine right now, just to prove my point. If I think about if you were at this stage, you wouldn't have the same steps below me as one reason. You might have some stuff suppressed that you're overriding at this point, or you might have a cut that you've suppressed, and I can't think of anyway what else you'd have suppressed, but You could just leave that. You could actually save yours right now with these changes applied. I'm going to say just no, and I'm going to reopen that thing again because I didn't really need to do the same steps twice. And so here's my part that really has those now active. And so yeah, so what you would do is you would have, this new attempt of see if this affects the part right. And then what we want to do is open the assembly that was created from here. So it's the only assembly I still have for my screw conveyor. So it's likely the only assembly you have. So if I'm going to go open another file, it's going to be in my assembly folder. This one is the one we created last week or even the week before. And there it is, has the three. I mean, so far we've got to this point where we've got the 3/16 parts and the 12 gauge parts in an assembly as this is the target assembly. And you should now have like, up here on the quick access toolbar, it should be screaming at you if you've made changes with the lightning bolts. And I usually update that right here. If this one's up here on my quick access toolbar is lit up, just click that, it'll do the update. Sometimes there might be some errors that you have to say accept. Sometimes it may not seem like it updated anything and that there wasn't like the communication isn't really happening, which was the case for a couple students today, actually. Like I came to here after doing that change we just made on the base component and the part assembly, and it didn't really act like it had affected this. So that was strange to me to not get an update. If you're getting an update here, that should be good because I believe that that's what I originally had when this was my plan of attack next. And then I was able to get into this assembly and open up this part. And then I was able to kind of check this part and say, okay, if I don't have, if I've never created a flat pattern before, I wouldn't have one. And I would check my A side definition. And if it's still correct, I could leave it. If it doesn't show up anything, like you select A side and there just doesn't show an obvious side, then I delete it off. I just go into this command and delete it, which I can do. I think you can only delete this once you've deleted a flat pattern. So there could be, so I think I went into this in class a little bit that when you're doing these kind of, to me, I'm kind of doing a major change to this part, and that affects the flat pattern, and it affects anyway how this individual part reacts. There are times when I do this that I have to delete these flat patterns in order to get like it to refresh itself and to get a better flat pattern. Sometimes that flat pattern is ignorant and it just won't accept changes that are maybe that have just caused major changes. And so if that happens, it's not great because um, if I delete the flat pattern, if I have it documented on my drawing or whatever, I mean, it's going to disappear. I'm going to lose that spot on my drawing, which is easy to identify if it's missing, but in a big assembly with hundreds of parts, it can be like finding a needle in a haystack a little bit to find out which flat patterns you've lost. So it really requires you as a drafter to keep pretty good attention to when you have to delete flat patterns and then knowing where they were on the drawing. So for me, before I would delete a flat pattern, I would just make sure I've identified where that thing is on my drawing so I can expect it to be lost. And then I can actually just reapply it to my drawing. So just keep track of yourself. It's not, I do delete flat patterns on occasion. It's just that I have to. It's just like something won't allow that flat pattern to cooperate again. And I've just got to get rid of it. And so in that case, if you, to me, when we went to the drawings, I hadn't really placed a flat pattern here because I couldn't create it. That's one. And so your part still might not have a flat pattern. That's what we're here to do is create it. And so what you would do is make sure your A side definition can be selected. And if it can't, just delete that out. If you can't delete this, it's because you have to delete the flat pattern first, and then you could reestablish the A side definition. So one problem with Inventor is that A side and that flat pattern. It's like you get one shot to define it correctly, and then if you don't define it correctly, it's kind of tied to the flat pattern, and you have to kind of delete that relationship. So yeah. Hey, what is it? Well, I don't know for sure.
Vito's friends were just in, and they are looking for a drafter for their cabinets, but they said they might be willing to work with her, like her having the baby there.
Oh, really? Okay, here, I got my video still playing here. I'm trying to push pause on it. That's all right. Where is my video? That's kind of weird.
Are you recording? Sorry.
All right, let's see here. Back. Where was I at? Oh yeah, I was evaluating the flat pattern on this. So I'd want to make sure that I can define the A side definition that it shows up correctly. and then go ahead and create that flat pattern. Mine's go to flat pattern, but hopefully it unfolds like this, and then we're off and running in a good space. If it doesn't do this and you still get that error, okay, I'm going to show you one way to get around that. I think at least one way. There's probably multiple ways to still get around that. I'm going to show you one way that's I think worked for a couple students. So if this doesn't, if you're at this point and you still just can't, you get that error trying to create this flat pattern, then here's our next step in the process. So I'm going to go to this folded part. Mine works, so I'd be complete if I get these results. If it didn't work, here's what we got to do. We got to come back in here and I'm going to export because I've made, and this can happen. Like I do feel like this isn't totally unusual. This happens that it just won't accept the updates that I've done at this stage of the model. I just cannot get it to update it. Maybe it's just too substantial or causing too much conflict. And so um, I would just export a new part and potentially make a new component with a new name. Like that's going to be one thing to kind of break the relationship that this currently has with that part and that that assembly and that part. So what I would do in that case, this would be my kind of last ditch effort to try to force this solid part to behave in its part file. And so what I would do is I'd go to make components again, and I would choose this part. And I would want to set the target assembly to the target assembly that I have. And so it would be a matter of, it may already be loading here, but just to make sure you could say, do you want to create a new target assembly? No, I want to send this to that one I've been working with. So I'd say no. And then it would ask you, well, what assembly are you sending yours to? And mine would be to that same assembly, the only one that we have. I would be saying this one. So I'm saying target that assembly, send it this part. Technically you've already sent that solid part and it already has a name. Um, and I've tried to keep the same name and let it override the part. I haven't had too good a success with that, but it does work to rename it. And so we would go next here, and then it would go to what is that name? Like this is the existing name of that part based off that solid body. So I have tried to save here. Of course, I need to pick the file location. I think it knows its file location if this is the name, but I haven't had this like overwrite like I'm expecting it to, which is unusual because I thought I could just overwrite, keep the same name. Maybe I can't have it open when I do that. And if you have the part open, I need to close the part, maybe close the assembly even. And so that could be one of my errors here is if I have the part and assembly already open, maybe I just need to close them down back to this, upstream part and perform this. You could try that, keeping it the same name, get these parts closed, and or get that assembly and that part closed, which I may have to, cancel this and get those things closed and then re-go into this and get to this point to where I've got the same name, that target assembly, and hit apply or OK, and see if then when you open this assembly, if it seems like the part is going to accept a flat pattern. If not, um, then I come back here to this stage again after selecting this is the component I'm exporting, and then I would give it a new name. And I would just come, this is why I'm kind of keeping my parts list here. For me, it would almost become SC13, SC0 through 13 would be my next available part number in my list. And I would just name it that and then choose this as the target assembly. Maybe when you change the name here, if I did change this, let me just try here. I mean, this thing kind of has a big name here. Yeah, it has all this going on with it. Let me just click off it and just get in here and say, if I was just going to change only the number to like number, oh, it won't let me back up here. What is going on? Yeah, technically it doesn't like me to change this. That's why I don't think it will. Okay, so I definitely may have to pick a new component here and then choose to rename it, maybe. Like I'd maybe be technically making a new component. I mean, I would first try to let it try to update that and override the that name and kind of I'm almost like redoing that part essentially, which still might delete every flat pattern and everything if you ever had that, or you had work on your drawing done with that. That part's probably going to disappear, or perhaps well we'll talk about with when we get to the drawing, we'll talk about what kind of difficulties I might look for if I've done some of this strategy work in my parts and assemblies. I may have to be careful in my drawings where these parts are displayed, dimensioned, and especially individually, and where their flat patterns are. Not just their flat patterns, but sometimes where they were actually dimensioned in my orthographic view drawing of this part. I may have to pay attention to make sure that I got the right part there, not the old part number name. It's pretty common, but that happens to drafters that they don't realize they have to replace some of the images on their drawings with the correct part numbers if they've done stuff like this. It's like at this stage, I'd have two different part numbers that are kind of doing the same part. And so this is, I can mess this up if I'm not careful on my drawing specifically. But I would give it a new name and then I'd hit apply, and that should act like it did the previous time, to where when I open this, that new part should be in my list here. And if I hit my update after I've done that, I think when we did this with one student, it did overwrite the name with the new name. In fact, it actually like it didn't require me to like get rid of the old one and put in the new one. It just actually got rid of the old one, and it seemed to have placed the new part number in there. And just remember, like just to repeat, this part numbering sequence, I'm not overly concerned that there's some consecutive real pattern to it. I'm just trying to make sure I have unique names. And so if I lose, like in mine, SC007, and it's gone, um, it might not even be in this list anymore. It could have been override. I don't know, or it could be this part that lives in here that I no longer use, and then my SC13 is maybe here, and that's the one I'm really going to use. So it kind of becomes like what I did with my solids, where I've made a copy, done some changes, and at some point I'm probably going to try to pull that part into an obsolete folder that I create, rather than just delete it. It's not going to be in my assembly anymore. I've already created a new part with a new name, and that's the one I really want to use. It's actually functioning for me better. And so I would want to make sure I purge these parts out of my list into some obsolete folder. Eventually, I'm going to do that with this original solid that I started. Like this is the one I'm really using for everything now after I did some modifications to it. Some of you may not have two solids, and that's okay. But eventually, I'm going to probably purge this one into an obsolete folder. And then that way, the only solid I see, and what if I see solid two, I'll be like, oh, it looks like I must have had a failed attempt at solid one, and I have this one. And really, that thing lives in my obsolete folder. So it's not like I've thrown it away. It's just that I've put it into obsolete. And I could have redundant parts sometimes doing what I'm doing now that I end up wanting to purge into an obsolete folder. And it's just good file management, because especially when I'm uploading all these files to a library vault system where other people are going to access them, and they're going to kind of be locked down and saved from getting messed with. I try not to send a bunch of worthless parts that allow someone else to have the confusion of figuring out which part is which. If I do my due diligence to purge, corrupted parts, corrupted files, redundant files if I've accidentally made them. You got to keep track of yourself, but then that's okay. And if I don't have a perfectly numbering sequence, like I might wonder, like, where is SC006? I can't find it anywhere. Well, it's because maybe it was a failed part, and I don't spend a lot of time looking for that stuff, because the parts numbering system to me are systematic in keeping them individual, not necessarily consecutive parts, and making sure that every number I picked does have a part. That's just kind of the process that I go through here. And so whether I have an individual part for all these, I hardly even pay attention to that, because I'm just looking for having the ones I need, and I'm not overly concerned of what the number is. It's just a unique number to that part. So just a little long story short there. But yeah, got to be aware of how I'm numbering. So then it may show up here. Sometimes this is a little ignorant in Inventor, that it doesn't update the new names that it should have updated. And so I could maybe still come in here and be like, well, I think I still have the same part. It has the same name. And there is this little hidden thing that is kind of powerful, and it's buried, but underneath, like where I would ground and root stuff, uh, if I'm bringing in individual parts, if I want to ground and root, or I think that's the most thing we've used from this drop-down list. There's another one here, is rename browser nodes. So this kind of like triggers this to rename if you've like done some replacement, and it's just kind of glitchy that sometimes it will take the new name on without forcing it, and other times it's like holding on to the old name even though it's a new part, even though like it could have the old name here, but when I go to the when I go here and open the part, it's the correct named part. In my case, I do have the same name in that part, but you could be like, hey, on the assembly, it's opening this part, but it says it's still here on the assembly. Yeah, do this like rename browser nodes. And I think all you have to do is hit like maybe part number or file or something. Maybe it's file name in this one, and just hit apply, and it should take on the new name that is the real name that you'd be looking for here. So remember this rename browser nodes. If you're seeing some anomalies on your list that you've kind of verified by opening the individual parts that that name does not match my part that opens from it, it could just be as simple like needing to like force these overrides kind of names. So it's just a little sticky with Inventor. I didn't go over that in class. So I'm glad I captured on this video. It was something else that came to my mind that when I'm doing this type of work, sometimes the file name or the part number doesn't come through, even if it's accepted the new part and the new name and all that in reality. But yeah, and then I would get into this part, yeah, and just double check that I get my flat pattern to work, and that's all I really wanted to cover today. Was just try to, this part has been our sticky part in that assembly, and so it's just taking a little bit of and then I didn't even add this to the drawing, but first thing coming in tomorrow, that's what I'm going to jump into is just adding this to my drawing and then start detailing my drawings. I have a few more parts to create. Uh, I mean, I've got a 12 gauge part assembly. I've got a 3/16 part assembly. I'm going to create a 1/4 inch part assembly and export the 1/4 inch parts from this, the two end plates essentially, with some bends on them that we got to do. So yeah, that's what we'll do tomorrow. And I think that will be kind of the end of the original creation of the housing. There's a few more parts we could add, but we'll see how we get and start detailing some drawings, at least around these particular parts. So we'll catch you on the next one, you guys.